G'day everyone. Welcome to this week's Scale Ups podcast. You are going to be listening to Mark McNally this week. He is the chief nobody of Nobody Studios. You may remember I interviewed a guy called Barry O'Reilly in June, and Barry and Mark have co-founded this business called Nobody Studios. We didn't really talk much about it when I interviewed Barry, but I dive deep into that today with Mark, who's got an unbelievably fascinating career around sort of startups, multiple, 14 startups, multiple exits, gone to IPO, been a public company CEO, all this sort of stuff. And they've built this really interesting business where they are going to produce 100 compelling companies over 5 years out of this sort of studio idea, bringing together the right talent, the right founders, the right ideas, stimulating, giving them the right amount of capital, getting their ideas validated in a short amount of time, and then bringing investors through a different and a unique model using equity crowdfunding, where the investors are investing at the Nobody Studios level, and they're getting a piece of all these companies that are getting produced. Fascinating business model. But there's a lot to learn in this, because if you're going to succeed in producing 100 companies, you're going to filter a lot of ideas. And I know many of you might be in traditional businesses and you're like, hey, I'm not a startup person, I'm not a tech founder. Why do I need to listen to this today? It's actually about thinking about what's the juice? What are the ingredients? How do you filter these ideas through? What are the things that are going to make them work? So if you want to scale your business, or you've got a new product or service idea, I guarantee you're going to learn some stuff about how to think about validating that idea, maybe even funding that idea through this episode. So please enjoy today's episode with Mark McNally.
Welcome to the Scale Ups podcast, where each week you get to hear Sean Steele, professional CEO, growth mentor, and advisory board chair, unpack the strategies that successful founders have used to achieve scale in their businesses. Stay tuned as he interviews the entrepreneurs who've made it, learns from industry experts, and follows a group of founders still striving to scale.
G'day everyone, and welcome to the Scale Ups podcast, where we help first-time founders learn the secrets of scaling so they can fulfill the potential of their businesses, make bigger decisions with greater confidence, and maximize the impact they can create in the world. I am your host, Sean Steele, and my guest today is Mark McNally, tech innovator, world traveler, by the looks of things, Mark, startup to scale-up CEO, founder, and chief nobody at Nobody Studios. List goes on. How are you, Mark?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Mate, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Welcome aboard. Do you get some blank looks when you introduce yourself as the chief nobody?
I usually don't do it without some context, and with the context, people love it. So, you got to prep the room. Always got to prep the room.
I like it. It's a good conversation starter. It's like, oh, what's nobody? Oh, right, Nobody's Studios. Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Well, look, for a bit of context for our audience today, regular listeners will know that I interviewed Barry O'Reilly on episode 38, who hosts the Unlearn podcast and does a lot of keynote speaking and faculty at Singularity University, and very strong kind of innovation roots. And we dug into mega trends around future of work and the ownership economy and Web3 technologies like NFTs and DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. I always fall over those words. Equity crowdfunding, and a whole bunch of other things. Really we were looking at what's coming down the pipeline. Okay, it's obviously here now in many forms, but that founders of $2 to $20 million businesses who make up a good chunk of our audience, what sort of things do they need to pay attention to and to explore, so they can think about where they might be able to leverage those things or consider them as opportunities or otherwise. Barry, in that episode, we weren't really focused on Nobody Studios, and these things we never have quite enough time unless we're doing a Tim Ferriss style 3 hour interview job, which is not the Scale Ups podcast. But Barry introduced you to me after that, because you guys have co-founded Nobody Studios, and your goal is to launch 100 compelling businesses in 5 years. Very audacious and exciting. Love that concept. And so, maybe if I can just give a bit of context, and please then feel free to correct and add some flavor to it, Mark. So the purpose of the business is to, sort of de-risk pre-seed ideas by shortening the time and the capital required to validate, repeatable, scalable business models before they then receive a sort of major investment. And so if I'm correct, then Nobody Studios it's a group of ideas that turn into companies. I don't know if they're all sort of subsidiaries, but you can talk to me about that. So you finding a founder or identifying a founder who might have an idea, or they're bringing it to you. You're attracting talent to the idea. You're working with you and your team, and I assume probably some advisors in specialty areas from time to time to work through and validate the ideas. And the ones that sort of come out the other side of your process, they have the opportunity. Your equity crowdfunding nobody studios, i.e. the equity is a bet on all the businesses in the portfolio, not each individual business. And so people are kind of investing at the top co, if you like, as opposed to the subsidiaries. Is that right? What have I missed?
Sean,
Help
it's
sort of clarify for me.
brilliant. What should we talk about next? You got it nailed. You got it 100%. Um, yeah, no, you clearly understand and the gist of what we're trying to accomplish. Yeah, it comes from I've been in the startup game my entire career. So I my first company when I came out of the army, in 1996, was two guys in the back of a warehouse who said they had this idea that they could connect buyers and suppliers on this new thing called the internet. And I joined them as employee 8, and we grew it to 800 employees. And I wrote the S1 and did the roadshow and took it public on the Nasdaq in 1999. And it was just one of those stories that you dreamt of your whole career. I was telling my parents at 7 I was going to be a startup guy. So to have that go to full fruition in my first entrepreneurial journey was a dream. It wasn't as beautiful as that summary. There was lots of twists and turns, and
Of course.
a lot of lucky breaks along the way, and some twists and turns on the way down when the market corrected itself in 2000 2001. But
Didn't
to be
just.
part of just a wealth creation event like that and see all the elements that went into it was really radically powerful for me. Um, and then so it got me hooked. When you're part of something that goes like that, you tell yourself things like, "Oh, I should just keep doing
I just
I
do it
should just do
again and
this for the
again and
rest of my
again.
life." Yeah. So I've made my best attempt at that for the rest of my career. So 14 startups, um, had another 3 or 4 exits along the way, 3 or 4 companies that didn't work out,
Hmm.
3 or 4 companies that are out there in some form or fashion. And in this venture line of creating startups and swinging for the fences on irrational ideas, that's actually a pretty good ratio, unfortunately. Um, but I kept feeling like it could be better. I felt like there was a different way to go about things. And going through a 25-year startup career, you go through these ups and dips and valleys, and you see the peaks of the markets, and you see when markets are really irrationally high and irrationally low, and both make me uncomfortable. Um, and when we started this, it was coming off I was at a spot in my career where I was challenging what I was supposed to do in my life, to be honest. And I always just walked into the next startup without giving it a whole lot of thought. There's always 2 or 3 competing for my time, and so the biggest challenge for me was which is the one I'm going to pick, right?
Mm.
And I went through a different cycle this time, and I said, okay, maybe a different part of my life. My boys at a certain age will look me in the eyes and say, "What do you do, Dad, for a living? And how do you make the world a better place?" Um, and I think we all collectively I feel like I had my pandemic before the pandemic. I had some
Mm.
other stuff going on in the family, had some health stuff, and so I was just coming off this moment of the rest of my life, whether it be a day or it be decades measured in decades, it's got to be put towards something that gets me out of bed, and it's going to be put towards something that I feel is going to give me a chance to seal my legacy on this planet. And I feel like I was given some gifts, and I feel like I have an obligation to fully pursue those things. And every step of my life where I wasn't, there was a 10 or 15-year career of my career where I was very focused on, I was being a family man, I'm a provider, I'm a dad. Maybe I took more conservative swings versus what I was
Hmm.
doing earlier in my career.
Hmm.
And those things weren't getting me out of bed,
Hmm.
and that was to the detriment of everybody around me that I love and everybody else that I could impact in the world. So when I did this soul searching, I discovered a few things. I discovered that I felt like this internet, is a paradigm shift that I've lived through, was such an amazing paradigm shift. It changed so many different companies and industries and created so much wealth and made so much good in the world happen that I really believe on the scale of paradigm shifts that we're going to live through, hopefully, this is just kindergarten compared to the next 5 to 10.
Hmm.
And so I realized that what we just gone through, if we get it right, was training ground for folks like us to spend the next 20 years getting it right and building really compelling companies and proving things in the world that we want to. And in that soul searching, I found myself re-energized that the startup vehicle is the best vehicle I know, where you can point to something in the world and say, I want this to be different.
Hmm.
Except I need to attract really talented people and a whole bunch of capital. And that's irrational. And you actually have a chance of pulling it off. And that gets me out of bed.
Yeah.
So that was the first starting point. The second starting point was, I've always absorbed energy from founders. So while I've done 14 companies where I was a CEO or founder level person, I always almost could never say no to any kind of startup. So I'd find a way to say yes as an advisor or as an angel investor or something. So I always had, two or three other companies going at once where I was, trying to see where they could go. And something happened about 4 or 5 years ago where I started seeing the kinds of people who were being referred to me from my network or from other founders. And the language they were using was no longer about improving the world or even building great products or having happy customers. They would almost exclusively talk about valuations.
Mm.
And I started to get this pit in my stomach the same way I got my pit in the stomach in 2007, right before 2008 happened. And this was around, when the taxi cab driver is telling me how he has 4 homes and he's about to buy a fifth, the market crashes.
Mm.
There's things I've seen being the adult in the room now for 25 years. And I started looking at it and I said, okay, venture capital's getting it wrong. And we're going into this hyper valuation mentality where we're giving great possible founders, we're messing them up because we're fighting for deal flow and we're giving them massive amounts of money too early and we're giving them way too big of a valuation and they don't understand that that's just like a excel exercise. It's not actually creation of value. And if
Mm.
it's not creation of value, then it's not representative of what could actually be an exit, right?
Mhm.
And so the real value for a founder is to build a company and sell it. And I learned this hard way. We could spend 40 minutes on this lesson alone, but I watched people in my career tell me victory was not valuations, victory was not things on Wall Street. Victory was cash in a suitcase. And if best possible scenario, you build a good company, you impact the world positively, and you walk away with cash in a suitcase. Because at the end of the day, you got to take care of you. And you got to take care of your family and the people around you. And if you've done that right, then all your investors and everybody else takes care of it, and you can do this rest of your life, right?
Mm.
And what happens when you raise too much money? I really don't think people understand. If you raise $10 million on a $40 million pre-money valuation, which is happening all day long in Series A and pre-seed companies right now and seed companies, well, everybody on that board expects you to sell for 10x. Well, your post money
Mm.
is 50 million. You got to sell for $500 million. You're
Yeah.
only 1 year old. You just created yourself a 10-year job
Mm.
with a lot more risk, a lot more exposure to other disruptions in the world. And you're going to ultimately be managed by the board, whether you like it or not. You've
Yeah.
actually sucked the soul out of most founders.
Mhm.
And then you look at the actual stats and you say, what's your most likely exit? Being acquired or going IPO? Well, the stats will tell you IPO is very, 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 very rare.
Mhm.
So then you hoping to sell. Well, 80% of M&A transactions happen under $200 million. So if you just raise $10 million on a $40 million pre, you're worth 50. Everyone on the board wants a 10x. You're shooting for a $500 million exit. Wait,
Yeah.
you're only a year and a half old. Someone comes along and offers you 200 million. The board's going to say no.
Yeah.
And people
True.
just don't realize that this kind of machine is broken. And so that was a big thesis when we started the studio is that we're going to build companies the way you used to build them. Max out your credit cards, borrow money from grandma, and build a company because when you do that, you're forced to build a product that people love and people will pay for.
Mhm.
And you don't get too big with your giant roadmaps that are 20 years long. And trust me, guilty as charged. I'm the guy I'm
Mhm.
a master roadmap guy.
Done
But
it.
I've
Yep. We
learned
all.
over 25, 30 years, I've learned while I love to know where I'm going, I've become really, really good at understanding what can I prove now?
Mm.
What can I prove that justifies further investment in the next stage?
Yeah.
Gets me to the next level of valuation so that when the music stops, you always can find a chair, right? If you haven't raised too much money and the markets start to change and you have a viable business, you'll always be able to raise capital and you'll always be able to exit. We're looking a little, a little reminiscent, I guess, in some of the things we were saying the last 2 years, because now the market's looking like it could go a little cold, right? Who
Mhm.
knows if what we're going through right now is permanent because who knows, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that, bankers and venture capitalists will never lose the opportunity to take advantage of a little bit of news to change metrics and that's what they should do. It's profit taking. um, but if we do go through a venture winter in the next year or two, which is very likely,
Yeah.
or at least possible, then guess what, you got a whole bunch of companies that raise money at monster valuations.
Yeah.
And what they did was they increased their salaries. They went from 200 employees to 2,000. And they needed to raise, just like they raised, $400 million 6 months ago. They need to raise $400 or $500 million in 6 months from now. But now
Yeah.
they can't because no one's going to get the valuation. And so
Mm.
what they're going to end up doing is slashing their workforce. They might have to raise money at a lower valuation, which means the investors who are celebrating their deal 6 months ago are actually getting diluted. It's just a
Yeah.
bunch of badness. And I've been through this cycle like three
Mm.
times. So there is something to be said for just never getting too overinflated, never getting too hot, never getting too cold. And that is really what our business model is about. We think that the side effect of all that stuff I just complained about is that the people who are most likely to acquire you, private equity firms who have more capital than ever, publicly traded companies who have more capital than ever, and are hyper aware that they can't innovate. So their long term longevity is dependent on acquisitions.
Yeah.
Those two people can't find companies they can afford. So that was another part of our thesis. Like, we're just going to be really
Mm.
good at building early stage companies that are
Yeah.
not overcapitalized,
Yeah.
but are fit right into the funnel of people who want to acquire these companies. And we're going to be completely comfortable with early to mid stage exits because the scale of what we're doing means we don't have to fall in love with any one deal.
Yeah.
And people can trust that. And so the investors that get involved in us to get a part of everything we do, they don't have to think about 10-year horizons for some of our exits. Some of our first exits will probably be in the next 12 months. And we just think it's a healthier business model, but it reflects a hell of a lot of scars over the course of a lot of careers.
Ah, geez, I love that. That is such a great setup, Mike. It reminds me of I've got some buyers agents who've helped me buy investment property over time, and like you, they've been through at least three market cycles, and it's only with that level of wisdom that they go, "Hey guys, stop getting excited about all these kind of get rich quick schemes, and you're going to get 1,000 properties in the next 2 years and so on." They're like, "Nope, like there's a model here that works. It's about value. It's about fair value.
Mhm.
It's tried and true principles that actually are the
Yep.
ones that those are the investors who aren't going to be caught, swimming naked
Yep.
when the tide goes out
Hmm.
because they're just taking their time. They're doing it properly. So I
Yep.
love that kind of return to basics 101. And it probably I can only imagine the conversations that you might be having with founders who then come into the Nobody Studios with this idea who on the for the first moment go, oh well, I was kind of expecting millions of dollars, but then in the next moment actually feel like a big sense of pressure come off their shoulders, like I don't have to go through that path, and I didn't maybe realize what that was actually going to create for me. But that's a much more exciting future, I expect.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I've met some founders who are like, I'm taking this thing to the moon and I'm going to take this thing public. And I remember that feeling and I understand it. Right. So I really think if they have the chutzpah and the character and the intelligence and the team around them, and that is their mission, they absolutely should do it because irrational goals is what makes startup works. And it's what makes
Hmm.
startup founders, our naivety is our superpower. Um,
Yeah.
so, I always encourage that. I'm the last person to take that away. But a lot of times you find somebody who realizes those big swings, they feel like a poser, right?
Mm.
Thinking they can take a cool idea to wait, my only path is a $10 billion exit on Wall Street. A lot of people are like, wait, I'm good enough to get this thing off the ground. I don't have the
Mm.
experience to go there, which means they can already see new capitals to come in, new management's going to come in, and they can already project that the fun of this thing that they really want to be doing is the creation side is going to change over
Mm.
time, right?
Hmm.
And then in this market, it's really hard to attract founders because there's so much money around and there's so many great startups. So bringing together a core group of people who have the experience you need to take your idea to life is harder than ever.
Yeah.
And we bring that as turnkey. So if we're involved, you get me in your ideation sessions, your product sessions, your biz dev sessions. You got Barry leading all those same sessions, and we really have a world class team, and it's getting better by the day. Um, and then one of the things we do really, really unique. And so I always tell people, look, if you raise some professional capital, you're probably too late for us. But if you're early stage, we can make a really mean argument that with us is going to be a better outcome than any other thing you can dream of. Because one of the things we do is if you're part of one of our companies, you earn equity across the whole studio, just like an investor.
Mm.
So you might be really focused on Nuco 12 within Nobody Studios, but we sell Nuco 47, you're going to get your piece of that. And we're
Yeah.
doing that because we're really trying to be people first in our building of this organization. And investors are used to this portfolio approach, right? You invest in 10 companies, four don't work, three are okay, one's a home run. You don't get that as an employee. As an
Mm.
employee, you go spend 3 years at a startup and it doesn't work, and you do the next one for 3 years and it doesn't work, and you do the next one for 3 years and it doesn't work. You got the making of a crappy career, right? But the odds are against you. Not everybody gets the Instagram
Mm.
and the Facebook, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so what we're saying is no, come into a family of creators that are building companies, and you might be all in on one, but you're going to earn equity in all the rest. So you have that portfolio exposure. And you know what? We don't believe that most people think in terms of only one idea. We're trying to embrace human nature.
Mm.
Grandpa's playbook was focus, focus, focus. You wouldn't even tell your boss that you played in a garage band on the weekends because he'd think you didn't have focus. And now we're like, no, if I don't know that you're playing a garage band on the weekends, I don't know you. Therefore, I can't be a good colleague. We can't build
Mm.
companies together. So if you've got passions for two or three companies, let's go build three companies. Maybe you're
Yeah.
70% on one, but you're dabbling in the other two. So you've got exposure across the whole portfolio, but you have more depth of equity in a couple more. And that's just
Mm.
like I created the playground for me. And then I said,
Mm.
if it makes sense, I'm going to attract the right people who see it as a playground themselves. And that's
Yeah.
kind of exactly what's happened.
Wow, that sounds like an amazing culture. Before we get into the detail on this, Mark, and I really appreciate your setup. For those listening who are thinking, I'm not a tech founder, I'm not a startup, guy or girl. I've got a traditional, services business. It's got lots of issues in terms of scaling. I'm making money and so on. The whole point of this conversation today is if you think that this is like, I don't need to listen to this, you're absolutely wrong. Because what I really want to do is challenge people's thinking and have them get inside your mind as to how you go through the process of validating these ideas and the business models and actually challenging them and pulling them apart. Because lots of founders that I know end up with some really interesting ideas, but they have never been in that kind of environment, never been in a startup environment, never get challenged on those kinds of things, and have maybe some desires to really scale their business, but haven't really had their thinking sort of stretched and challenged. So I'd love to, sort of get into the nuts and bolts about how you get from this. I'm sure you don't think about it as a typical funnel, but at the end of the day, you want to sort of produce 100 successful companies out the other end. So I'm sure you start with more ideas than the 100,
Mhm.
because probably not every one of them is going to be great. So maybe you could just actually give us a quick insight, Mark, at the start as to where are you at on this journey? Because from when you started, you want to produce 100. Like, where's the business at in terms of, I guess, numbers of companies? Where are the stages?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, we'll have four in the market this quarter. We have 14 in development. My guess is we'll be around eight or nine launched by the end of the year.
Hmm.
And should be going into next year where that'll be our first full year where our kind of run rate to get to 100 is you're kind of around doing 15 a year, something like that, 17 a year.
Hmm.
So my guess is we'll be close to that run rate towards the end of last next year.
Hmm.
Um, Probably the final year we're doing more like 2025.
Yeah.
Um, we've got a little bit of a mix. We are an idea lab. We put a lot of focus on our ability to create ideas. We invest a lot of energy into our focus groups, which are kind of vertical centric or sector centric. And a lot of
Okay.
those are made up by angel investors who just almost by happenstance, we started to see collections of, hey, we got some really amazing angel investors that are part of the studio. And six of these people are really great in hospitality and travel tech, and they're kings of their industry. And then we looked around like, wait, we got like four in wellness. Wait, we got eight that are really passionate about climate tech. And we started saying, like, you almost can't make up that energy. So we started creating advisory boards around them,
Hmm.
where they get a little bit more equity incentives to help us create ideas, but they almost see it like an intellectual exercise, right? To just
Mm.
brain dump and talk about what they know, and great ideas come out of it, right? Um, and so that'll be something that'll always be a Honeywell for us in terms of just creation of new ideas. We expect to be good at it. That being said, we also expect two other areas to be key parts of our idea sourcing. So we expect that young founders will walk in the front door, right? And as that happens, there's some really cool things about that. We might be doing what we call mini acquisition. So if they've spent some time or money, spent some grandma's money and their credit cards building a prototype, working at something on it, well, they have the day job and they're doing this as a moonlighting for a year and a half, but they want to shift gears and go full time into their startup. The cool thing about us is we get a founder, we get some tech, we might even have some market validation, and it's something we can move faster than if we start from ground
Hmm.
up, right?
Hmm.
So that's attractive for us. We can't do that on every company, but it's attractive when we find the right ones. And
Yeah.
then the third category is, we're having a lot of corporations approach us and even private equity firms saying these are the kinds of things we want to acquire. Can you go build them? And that's
All
really
right. Okay.
interesting. That's really interesting for a lot of
Build
reasons,
to
right?
order.
Yeah, we call it made to order acquisition. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I'm pretty I'm in Hollywood right now, so I'll use the metaphor. When someone does most of the people in Hollywood are like working day jobs, waiting tables to break out, right? But when you do something really good in Hollywood, then you write your own ticket and you tell
Mm.
people, I want my own studio. I want my own contracts. I want my own thing. And that's kind of how we approach those conversations. As we say,
Mm.
like, I actually spent a little bit of time trying to do corporate innovation, and I think it's fool's gold. This idea that we think young, scrappy, agile companies can teach big behemoth corporations to be agile. The
Yeah.
actual opposite happens. The big companies make the small ones suck. So we actually say, hey, we can build companies you can buy, but we're not even going to sign a Christmas card. So don't connect with your attorney. We're not doing NDAs. We're not doing anything. If you want to talk out loud about where your roadmap's going, where you'd like to acquire, you want to share knowledge with us, we may or may not go build a company that you may or may not be able to buy, but
Mm.
we're a better option than the current venture funnel that's creating companies that all think they're unicorns.
Yeah.
And we're
Huh,
actually having a
that's
pretty
so
high
interesting.
uptake on people sharing a lot of ideas.
And so then who's okay, so you've either, you've kind of been given the mandate and you think it's interesting from a private equity firm or a larger company, or a founder's come to you, or you're in your idea lab and you come up with an idea. Talk me through the process and also the teams that sort of get involved. Like, just at least at a high level, what's the sort of process that you go through first, and then who gets involved at what stages?
Yeah, so we've got a fairly regimented, built out process that we affectionately called the FruAgressive model, which is a combination of frugal and aggressive, and sometimes we call it frugressivity. So it's frugal, aggressive, and creativity. Um, and it basically breaks it down into stages, and we get past like fancy names. At the end of the day, there's like a idea stage, which we could be playing with, like you said, lots of ideas. They might
Hmm.
just be post-it notes or napkins, but they're
Yeah.
enough that we can capture. I think I know what we're trying to accomplish with that.
Hmm.
Then we go through like a scoring process. Some of the things we greenlit early on were because they're ideas that were pretty fleshed out, and some of the other founders and myself ideas for years. So there's some groundwork there. There's some assets.
Hmm.
We also chose some early on because we knew that the companies that we did choose would be easily explainable to the crowd, right? And I say that because I spent half my career doing stuff that I couldn't explain to my mom, right? An algorithm to optimize predictive analytics for hospital
Mm.
readmissions doesn't mean anything to most people, right?
Yeah.
Um, so if you look at a lot of the companies we're focused on now, they tend to be things that consumers can get their head around because consumers will be part of our funding source, right?
Can you give us a couple of examples, Mark? Like, what would be, say, maybe, two of the companies at the moment that are in that, the ones that are about to go live this quarter?
Yeah, so one is an organization called Ovations, and Ovations was actually something I conceived of when I was working with an organization in New Zealand years ago. And I was running sales and marketing, and I'd get these people all around the world joining these calls. And I knew after 15 minutes, I was doing Zoom calls before it was popular. Um, I realized that within 15, 20, 30 minutes, people are tuning out, and I'm trying to do a 3 hour meeting about the goals for the sales quarter, right? And I remember thinking to myself, if I was in a physical room with these folks, I could spruce it up with some music, with a keynote speaker, with different things. And I'm like, someone needs to find a way to spruce up Zoom calls. And so I wrote it down on my idea board, and then the pandemic happened, and I was like, hey, this is a better idea than I thought.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that's being led by Ray Leonard Jr., as father of Sugar Ray Leonard, world boxing champion, and
Uh-huh.
Ray's grown up in celebrity his entire life, and we actually got introduced years ago, and he was going to be one of our consultants around influence, which is a big part of our studio kind of approach and using influencers. But Ray wouldn't stop asking me about this company we had on the idea board that had a different name at the time. But he kept asking me about. The third time he asked me, I'm like, Ray, why do you keep asking me about this? I mean, I love the passion, but tell me. And Ray was like, Mark, my dad's made more money speaking. He never did boxing. And in 2020, I was set to make 7 figures speaking. But 2020 came along and like 42 events got canceled worldwide. And so it just makes sense to me that we have to transition speakers to an online environment. And so Ovations is think book online talent on demand for your Zoom call as early as tomorrow and as short as 15 minutes. So instead of flying Barry O'Reilly halfway around the world for 10 grand to go speak for 2 hours at your event, get him
Mm.
tomorrow morning for 500 bucks for 15 minutes.
Hmm.
And I've done marketplaces my whole life. One of the marketplaces I love the most is what I call emerging marketplaces. So we're not going towards the speaker bureau market. I actually want emerging speakers. You should be a speaker. I should be a speaker. Barry should be a speaker. And I
Mm.
want emerging bookers. So the bookers of talent like Ray and Barry of yesterday, they're the Oracle event planners and the
Mm.
IBM event
Mm.
planners stuff.
Yeah.
What I love about Ovations, it could be Billy Bob, who's a Salesforce manager at a AAA plumbing in Texas, and he's got
Mm.
82 people joining his sales meeting tomorrow morning, and he's like, "Wait, I can have Ray Leonard join for 10 minutes and give a pep talk." That
Huh,
wasn't possible before, and we're going
that
to
is
make it
classic.
possible with Ovations. We're really fired up
I
about that one.
I got asked for one of those just the other day. A company in Singapore was like, hey, we're going to have, I was like, maybe, yeah, 50, 60, 70 like channel salespeople from Asia on this thing. And we want to talk to them about social selling. Who do we get? And so I
Yeah.
gave them a referral to someone who could do that. But I didn't know there was a platform that could help us do that. I love
Yeah,
that.
so
Beautiful.
we've tied in the calendaring, the scheduling, the payments, the profiles. So yeah, we're really excited about
It's
that.
cool.
That'll be full launch here this quarter. Um, and yeah, we're doing stuff really across the board. You'll see, collections of things in health and wellness. We're really passionate about, with all due respect for the healthcare system worldwide, it's largely been tailored towards trauma, you know,
Hmm.
heart
Mm.
attacks, gunshots, car accidents. We're not good at wellness. And so we're really passionate about everything from mental health to substance abuse treatment, which we think is archaic, to even some of the things that are emerging, like pharmaceuticals compared to psychedelics. Some of the emerging spaces, this plant medicine has been around for thousands of years. The science is breathtaking that it's 100 times more effective than pharmaceuticals.
Mm.
So we're doing a whole bunch of things around that it just affect normal human beings. Um, and yeah, and on and on. We're looking at stuff from how you deal with your homeowners association, which homeowners association in the United States is 66 million homes live under a HOA. You pay a fee to the HOA. It says homeowners association, but really their job is to make homeowners miserable. Um, and so we're actually creating a homeowners association for the homeowners, which helps
Oh,
them negotiate and advocate against the homeowners associations, which have all the control according to state laws. And about half of all the net worth of property in the United States is locked up in HOAs. So it's some of the
mm.
more affluent folks that, and some of the fees it started from I was traveling a lot in Asia years and years ago, like 12 years ago, and I came back and had a letter from my HOA that my palm tree had to be cut. And I'm like, oh, okay, got the palm tree cut. And a couple months later, I got this notice that I had a lien against my house for $6,000, and I had to do all the research and come to find out I was getting charged $100 a day after that first letter for not cutting that one palm tree. But I was in Asia for 3 months and had no idea. And that's like negotiating with the mafia, to have to pay that kind of money for a single palm tree, right? But I ended up paying half of that, and there probably was a better way. If there's an organization that could have helped me, I would have paid them for it.
Mm. Hmm.
So there's lots of things that we are
Mm.
building where people resonate with and say, "Man, that should exist." And they usually
Yeah.
tend to be big market opportunities, lots of users. They tend to be things where it doesn't require someone with a bag to be carrying it, knocking on a door, and selling something. We tend to be
Hmm.
focused on digital acquisition. I spent most of my career in some form or fashion in e-commerce. So while I've sold millions of dollars to people knocking on a door and taking them golfing and whining and dining, I've sold more to people I've never met online, and I prefer the latter.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
we tend to get attracted to businesses where we know we can at least get initial customer landing point digitally, and we can
Yeah.
scale digitally. Yeah.
So you're starting actually, it's a perfect segue because I guess my next question is, and maybe it's part of the scoring matrix that you sort of alluded to before, or maybe it's something else, but when you think about that, there's a set of ingredients where you're probably mentally or, consciously or unconsciously thinking through going, these are the things we really want to see. Now, okay, maybe on some ideas, maybe we lack this one, but we've really doubled down on that one. It's super strong in this area. What's the handful of things that you think together make the strongest case for an idea that's going to scale and that's going to sort of have impact and succeed?
Well, I think you know, and again, I'm guilty as charged when I talk to about other people doing this wrong because I did this wrong for half my career, and now I'm passionate on the opposite side, which is I think you have to really understand that for all your vision and all your passion about what something could be, you have to also enjoy the whole process of what is the thesis and what is the experiment, and think of it in those terms, right? And we're lucky to have Barry a part of the team. He's a lean specialist and knows that language very well. But you have to get down to these things and say, and I was just talking to a founder this morning that wanted to become part of the studio, and God bless her, her vision and passion for this big marketplace that she wanted to solve was resonating. But I'm like, this 49-year-old man going through 14 startups and started, venture capital startups my entire life, it felt to me like you described 27 different companies that have their own 10-year roadmaps each.
Mm.
So, how do you boil it down into the single test that might be 1 week test or a 2 week test or a 1 month test that then unlocks the keys to the next test, right? And that's what we've tried to do in our structure. So I said progressive, the
Mm.
first step starts an idea, and that's just a scorecard, but then
Yeah.
unlocks the next level investment, which is not a lot, but it's enough for us to build out business models, a product canvas, the first thesis. We're starting to invest more to start structuring that. And if we get past that, then it unlocks the next one and says, okay, now we're actually going to invest real money to build this thing and put it out in the market. But what was
Mm.
our thesis? How will we know we succeeded or not? Right.
Mm.
So when you launch it, we're not all just blowing hot air up each other's skirts, right? And telling us how it's worked. We have
Yeah.
to go back and say, we said 1 + 1 = 2, and it came out to 14. Is that good or bad? Was our
Mm.
thesis wrong? Was the product wrong? Was the product better than we thought? Do we build something completely different? What are the customers saying? Right. And so I just think that's something that, frankly, I think we'll be doing our entire journey. I think 30 years from now we'll still be getting good at that. So it's something that you always
Yeah.
have to force yourself to do because, again, one of the things we're really good at as founders is being irrationally excited and naive and pursuing something that's big and dreamy. I think that anchor, even maybe may not be one you talk about a lot, figuring out that anchor in your body that says yes, but I'm not going to go so far that I build an organization where I look backwards and go, shit, I just spent $4 million on the wrong thing. And I've been there before. And I'm sorry
Mm.
to those investors because I've done it before. I'm never going to do it again. So we are just making sure that every investment we make is bound the right thesis and experiment to unlock the next step. And at the end of the day, look, we're not an organization that is going to fund our startups the entire distance,
Yeah.
right? And we made a very concerted choice to do that, right? So if you're funding your own startups the entire distance, seeds, Series A, Series B, whatever, it's almost like you can cover up your own mistakes, right?
Mm.
And so one of the things we loved early was that early on, we know that we're only going to take it to about a seed stage. And then we have to have external investors, albeit they may be friendly, external investors that'll look at the deal and decide on their own merits to continue to invest it. And that
Yeah.
hurdle, that checks and balances is a really healthy check and balances. And if
You
we
mean
had
for the founder in terms of just the
for
way
us,
that they,
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
we're part of the, we're a large owner of the company. So it's us and the
Mm.
founder knowing that
Mm-hmm.
thing doesn't survive if we can't convince external investors to keep supporting it.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
Now, over time, we'll have our own resources and we make some, I'm sure we'll make some choices to fund certain companies that need more time. But we don't
Yeah.
want to structurally make that part of what we do because what you'll end up
Mm-hmm.
doing is covering up your own mistakes. Right. And I love the tension. And we've said this often, like, we're going to be very transparent about what our idea was from day one, what we got right, what we got wrong, where it eventually is. And we're not going to go out and take it for external capital until we believe it's met all the marks that we promised the market, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately, the most valuable thing we can do as a studio is have brand equity
Yeah.
that people know we build high quality companies.
Yeah.
And we
Every
either
time we look at
fall
a
on our
Nobody Studio
sword,
company. Yeah.
yep, we fall on our sword and kill the companies, or we fund them ourselves. But when we say it's ready, it's got to stand for something. And
Mm.
that's more valuable to us than anything else. And any future founder is going to value that we have that reputation. And so therefore, you got to fall on your sword sometimes. We might have to kill some companies. We might have
Mm-hmm.
to fund them more at the expense of other companies we're excited about.
Yeah.
But I'm very comfortable with that tension, and we've said it from day one. That's something we have to embrace.
So in the equity crowdfunding then of the Nobody Studios model, is, in a typical equity crowdfunding model, and you're obviously far more expert in it than I am, but typically there's a campaign. It seems to work very well with people who are going to have large numbers of sort of passionate fans or customers who might want to get behind the brand. And I've probably watched maybe 20 or 30 in the last 6 months come through one of the equity crowdfunding platforms that I'm attached to. And it's been just fascinating to kind of watch the way the campaigns and all the rest are develop. If equity crowdfunding investors are coming in at the top co level, at the Nobody Studios level, how do you do the equity crowdfunding? Have you got kind of like is it every campaign is like, hey, here's a really exciting business, you should get behind Nobody Studios, come and invest at the top level, and every time there's a business that's kind of ready, it's got its own kind of campaign? Or how do you manage that
Yeah.
process?
So first and foremost, we're raising for the studio.
Hmm.
And when you invest in the studio, every company we create, whatever your pro rata ownership of the studio is, you're getting the same in the new co, right?
Hmm.
So there's not an independent investment decision to be made.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, I like the way these guys are building companies. I like their thesis. I like their approach. The people, you don't have to believe in every company. You're still getting a piece of it, right?
Hmm.
And that's, I think that's really attractive for the retail investor that the crowdfunding market represents because it was never possible before, right?
Mm,
Like you had to be a multi-million dollar limited partner in a venture capital fund to have the same kind of exposure. And
mm,
now you can write a $25 check or $1,000 check and have the same kind of exposure. And
totally.
I'm thrilled to bring that to the market because it's like
Yeah.
a democratization of that kind of exposure that
Yeah, I think
used
it's
to be locked in
beautiful.
the back room, right?
Yeah.
So I love that. And then, we very
Actually, just to
specifically
put that
do.
in context, I already take I get to sit with my 17 and 14-year-old and sit down and look at the IM that's on the equity crowdfunding plan and go, you guys are getting to see stuff that no other 14 and 17-year-olds have ever seen before. And by the way, you guys have got enough money to invest in this thing. Like, let's
Yeah,
put our optics on. I think it's incredible how it's changed the opportunity for the investment.
yeah, yeah. And I think that, I think there's a lot of people who enjoy going into the individual deals. I call it almost like the day traders, who are like trying to
Mm-hmm.
make their own decisions of this is a winner or it's a not. People like that
Mm-hmm.
feeling.
Yeah,
I get it. But for most people, picking a winner is a pretty scary thing, right?
for
And
sure.
so we represent this idea that you don't actually have to pick a winner. You just
Mm.
have to pick that
Invest
you
the
want to be
team that
part of
picks the
everything
winners.
we're
Yeah.
doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're still get this exposure of like professional management. We're validating our ideas, we're picking our ideas the right way, we're funding them the right way, or we're killing them, we're building them the right way. Instead of looking at maybe getting sucked into some fancy marketing and going, oh my God, that's really cool, but it's gonna be a dog, right?
Mm.
And so I think for a lot of the retail investor who may not be that kind of stock picker winner kind of person, it's really, really appealing to get exposure they wouldn't otherwise get, but also really trust the team and the thesis and
Mm.
also the ethos of who we are, right?
Yeah.
Our ethos is a really strong part of our branding. We're very people first, we're very diversive, we're only doing companies that'll make the world a better place. And so I think there's a lot of things that are resonating with that kind of that core
Mm.
investor. Then beyond that, we'll use our muscle that we're building in crowdfunding. We won't be able to crowdfund the studio forever, whatever
Mm-hmm.
capital we need, because at some point we're going to start to look like an investment company, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not allowed under crowdfunding rules. And we're aware of that. But it's just right now they're all subsidiaries. So we're completely
Yeah.
legitimate to do crowdfunding. But in a year time, 2 years time, we're completely expecting to close the door to crowdfunding to the studio.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But then use that muscle for our portfolio companies.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why we really believe in crowdfunding is exactly what we're going through right now with this, theoretical venture winter, right? Is that whether the market is hot or the market is cold, you're always stuck in the echo chamber of the venture capital community, right? Whatever the current thesis is, 99% of people are repeating the same thesis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I always want to have some democracy to make sure that we're not dying on the vine because somebody said that's a bad business idea. That didn't work last year. Maybe it's a great idea. If you can get the crowd to support it, now you got half the funding, you get the other half from professional. I mean, in a perfect world, we're always getting half our capital from crowd and half our capital from professional. And I wouldn't take 100% from either one if I had my choice. I would just always kind of
Mm-hmm.
try to keep this balance.
Mm. That's interesting. So when does in that model, uh, when does the investor realize their return through
So
crowdfunding?
our only business model as a studio is to build and sell companies,
Mm-hmm.
which is important differentiation because there's a lot of people out there who charge fees to their firms or their new cos.
Mm.
Um, and I've seen that up close and personal, and I can tell you it's nothing but badness. You get a lot of conflicts of interest, right?
Big time.
You get a lot of confusion about what success is. When you say my only job is to build good companies and exit them, you're 100% aligned with investors and founders.
Mm.
So that's it. When we sell a company, all this our fee structure is we essentially take our out of pocket back into the studio and we take around 30% back into the studio and the rest goes out to stakeholders. So someone
Mm-hmm.
who's investing into the studio, when you start to model this out, we've got a really robust model that's pretty compelling, but when you model this out, it's almost like our first projected exit, people's principal is almost returned. And the second one's gravy. Anything beyond that is just, ongoing gravy. So the astute investors will buy and hold their studio position and never sell again because they'll just
Mm.
want to keep taking essentially dividends off of our exits. Um, they won't be required to double down. They won't be required to invest more, but we're always going to go to our internal investors first. So if we're raising more capital for the studio, they'd have a chance to up their
That's
position
the
if they like
opportunity.
what they
Yeah.
see. If one of our companies is leaving the nest and about to raise capital, we'll let our internal folks fund it first. So we're going to have some things that are rocket ships, and before it goes out to external, fund it ourselves, right? And I think that's really exciting for a lot of people to have exposure to early stage deal flow that they kind of have a little bit of exclusive, exposure to.
Mm. Hmm. I love it. So one of the things that jumps out to me is that you've been uh, you've built all these startups and you've been a professional CEO in larger organizations, and so you're not only obviously supporting directly all these founders to kind of work through these ideas and bring these companies to life, but then of course you're also the CEO of Nobody Studios, and so you would have you've got a group of people there that you're leading who are also then supporting all the founders. How many people are in Nobody Studios, by the way?
So I should have a perfect answer for this, but one of the reasons why we don't is because we really have a lot of folks that are doing like moonlighting. Some
Hmm.
fantastic people, executives, product managers, whatever, at, say
Hmm.
AWS or Google, but
Hmm.
they're giving us 10 hours a week. We call
Yeah.
those folks that are nobodies, right? So
Yeah.
roughly our kind of
Got it.
ecosystems
Okay.
around 100,
Yeah.
nobodies. But kind
Hmm.
of the people who are putting a lot of day-to-day hours into the organization, it's around
Hmm.
15, 20.
Got it. Cool.
And we're
Okay.
growing.
Nice.
We've got some really exciting key hires coming on board in the next few weeks, and we'll continue that path. So
Yeah. So now I know we're kind of getting close to the time, Mark, and I feel like I could just talk to you all day. I'm interested in you mentioned something earlier about health, and there was also a bit of a kind of like as many of us do in our lifetimes that we have moments where we actually really take a big step back and look at the next chapter and think about what do we actually really want from life and what's important to us and so on. What have you learned about your physical and emotional and mental state and how to keep it optimized so that you've actually got energy for this journey? Because this is a high energy transfer kind of world that you're in. You've found those exciting ideas and there's a lot of energy moving around. How do you keep yourself in the space where actually you can give appropriately and you can get what you need to sustain yourself?
yeah, no, great question. I guess for me, part of when I was going through that soul searching, it was coming off of a moment in my life where I had a lot of folks that had gone through some dark moments, and it was I've always been the person that people lean on, and I'm the person that rises to the occasion and tries to help people through those moments. Um, and I lost a few people during that time as well, and um, for me, I woke up in a moment that I never expected to be at, and I'm glad I did, which was a really dark spot for me. And I was able to find a way to be power out of it stronger than ever. And when I did, I said, okay, now every day from now on is going to be changing the world and be worthy of whatever I'm supposed to do to impact this world. But it gave me this deep empathy that being kind of a type, even the military background, you just talk about powering through things and getting shit done, and you don't
Hmm.
whine and you don't complain, like, and there's strength in that, right? And I get that that's still a part of me, but for me to have even glimpsed into kind of the pit of darkness, it gave me this really deep empathy that I'm so glad I have now, because I see the pain and suffering and struggle all around me that people aren't able to articulate or aren't comfortable articulating. And I just know we got to have a better way to find help for folks, right? So that is one of my whys. It's one of my reasons, because I just know that the true underlying pain and struggle in this world is more profound than we have any clue of, right?
Hmm.
And I'm passionate about being a part of that and a part of that solution. Um, for me, I've certainly have realized over time that I have a hyper ability to work at a pace and a throughput and a bandwidth level that would not be healthy for a lot of people, but it's actually ironically healthy for me, right?
Right.
It's operating at that level gives me my own energy, right?
Hmm.
Um, and yet I always have to sometimes remind myself that there are warning signs when I've gone too far, right? And those warning signs I just have to become more and more acutely good at listening to.
Hmm.
And maybe there are times that I had to learn it the hard way, every other week. And maybe now it's every 6 months I learn it the hard way, but I still have to look for those signals and say, hey, this is still something you have to get good at. You didn't see the warning signs here. You should have taken a day off for your own
Hmm.
mental health, for your own
Hmm.
family, for your own physicality. You should have taken this weekend off and not work. Like, those are things that I think I've gotten through my entire life being pretty good at listening to, but more
Hmm.
than ever at this stage of my life, I have to be hyper good at it. And I always counsel people to do the same thing. I think
Hmm.
nobody knows us better than ourselves.
Yeah.
And if you're not willing to listen to that own coaching and work those things, then you're kind of doomed to repeat
Yeah.
whatever your mistakes are, right?
Yeah, our bodies are pretty good at giving us feedback until we listen, right? It tends to get louder and
Oh
louder. You can
yeah,
ignore it. You can ignore it all you like, and at some point, it's just
there's
going to
no
get
escaping. Yep.
real loud.
Yep.
Well, I also imagine, Mark, that's and thank you for sharing that, because I imagine also for the founders of Nobody Studios, and founders go through a hell of a lot emotionally and mentally and physically, having that level of anchoring and empathy because of your own experiences and the, I guess, the sort of maturity in the industry and the ability to kind of look back over numerous cycles is probably really helpful in grounding founders and being able to kind of call things out and provide support where it's needed.
Yeah, and look, and first and foremost, I mean, this is about trying to have a healthy, happy journey, right?
Hmm.
You could talk to me for months and never hear me talk about financial returns, unless I'm forced to talk about, investor kind of stuff. But I'm obviously very passionate about the model we're building, the financial returns of what we're creating. But you'll hear me talk only about impacting people's lives, improving their lives. And at the end of the day, it's being a good place to work,
Hmm.
enjoying working with each other, uplifting each other. And I can be demanding and excited the same way I expect other people to be demanding, but we have a culture of like, hey, if you need to say, peace out, rough day, rough week, whatever, you're just going to get a warm hug and total understanding and let us know when you're back.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
I always compare when I started my career, when you left the office at 5 p.m., that was it. Like if you got a page, I had a pager back then. I was super important. If you got a page, it was like a crisis, right? If someone left you a voicemail at home, like it was a crisis. But
Hmm.
you basically had a chance to check out at 5 p.m.
Yeah.
Weekends were yours. And now we work in a 24-hour cycle, and we're an international organization, so we're 24 hours more than ever. The only way that works is if you give people permission and autonomy to manage their own schedules, right?
Yeah.
Where they can kind of make their breaks and push back and not feel that pressure to be on every damn call. Um, and just know what they got to do to manage their own, energy and their own, physical health.
Yeah. Wise words, Mark. Wise words. Look, we're out of time today. I just want to say a huge thank you to you. I'd love to acknowledge the way you guys are building Nobody Studios. The context you set up up front was beautiful. I think it's such a fascinating organization, and I certainly look forward to continuing to getting involved, finding ways to get involved and support the business as it goes forward. How do people? What would you recommend to people as the best source of information? Follow along, get more involved, learn more about it. Where would you direct them to?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Sean, and thank you again for having me on here. I love what you're doing, and I always enjoy being interviewed by a great host because you made it an easy process for me. Um, Look, we're really open, so nobodystudios.com is the best place to go. We register for our newsletter. You'll get all the important information. Follow us on social. LinkedIn's kind of our primary, but we're also open. Mark at Nobody Studios, Barry at nobodystudios.com. We love dialogue, so reach out for anything.
Beautiful. Well, Mark McNally, thank you very much for your time today. Folks, I really hope you enjoyed the show. Huge thanks to Mark McNally from Nobody Studios. Before you go, if you're on the socials and you want to find Scale Up's podcast, it's at Scale Up's podcast on all the usuals except for Twitter. Still can't get my head around Twitter, just don't love it. You can also find us on the website. All the transcripts of the full episodes are also on the website. You can find us on YouTube. You've been listening to Scale Up's podcast. I'm your host, Sean Steele, and I look forward to speaking with you again next week. Thanks so much, Mark.
Thanks, Sean.
G'day everyone, just a couple of quick things before you go. If you have questions that you'd love myself or an upcoming guest to tackle about challenges that you're facing in scaling your business, please just jump straight on the website, scaleupspodcast.com. You can record your message straight from your mobile by hitting the button on the right-hand side of the page, or you can just email them the old-fashioned way, questions@scaleupspodcast.com. And just a quick reminder, nothing we spoke about today constitutes financial or business advice. If you are considering making big decisions in your business, seek out a professional who can look at your situation in detail and make sure you're getting sound, personalized advice. Thanks for listening. Look forward to being back in your podcast feed next week.